All right. And welcome back once again to Community Viewpoint, part 2 of this informational segment with Dr. Vogel. The doctor was talking about possibility of climate change changing the facts that why DOE believes that the waste stream only has to be looked at for a certain amount of time.
Let's try to recapture that.
Okay.
So we can. I won't.
So
I kind of ran you out of your time last time, so I'll just take a step back.
It was interesting.
We're talking about a calculation, it's called a performance assessment.
Right.
That's done to look at what the risks are to people from the disposal of these wastes. And for low-level waste, the time that's required for a performance assessment is 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were comparing it to materials that are not that different from the waste that we're talking about here. What we're calling uranium-233, as I said, is mostly uranium-235, and the waste we were talking about disposing in a geologic repository is uranium-235 and plutonium. So they're not that different. The difference really comes from the fact that the geologic repository performance assessments required you look for a minimum of 10,000 years, and in the case of Yucca Mountain, it was 1,000,000 years. And the big difference we're trying to capture here is, although DOE did look at projections of doses to people till time of peak dose, and they went out to 500,000 years, they used current conditions. And one thing that's really important is how things can change with the future time.
If I remember correctly, with the EPA study that we had to look at for the future for Yucca Mountain, they had to take into account for changes in the climate too, wasn't it?
We did. When we did it originally under the older rules, we actually assumed full glacial conditions would come back every so often.
Yeah, I thought I remember that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and because it's very difficult to project that, what the NRC and the EPA did in the Yucca Mountain rule was to create a long-term average flow that sort of took into account the fact that the glacial climates would change, and it was weighted in terms of how much of it would be. I said that backwards. If you look at glacial climate changes over time, the type of climate change we're in right now, this interglacial period, is relatively short. Some of the glacial periods immediately following glacial periods are relatively long. So we're in actually a short period right now, and we would expect to go into a period where there'd be more precipitation, more water moving through it, and that's what's captured in the rules. And so the essence here is that one reason that it may not be appropriate to look at this as low-level waste is that it does last. The half-life of uranium-235, I got it, 700 million years, if I'm not mistaken. You've got it. It's written on that piece of paper. You could check and correct me if you want to.
I don't want to do that, but yeah, it's
not an insignificant amount of radioactivity, and it's not a. It should be looked at for a long time, and like I said, DOE is trying to look at it for a long time, and they have some arguments as to why it would last, why they don't need to look at the climate change. Their argument is that we're in an area where the ground surface is actually being built up, it's not eroding. They don't expect the water to move through the system. The point is, I think the only point that you can draw here is this uranium-233 looks like special nuclear material. We talked about greater than class C once, I think, John. That's another type of material which is low-level waste, but it's not considered suitable for shallow land disposal, and it has to go into a repository. And that's an artifact of the way we categorize nuclear waste in this country. We basically say it's either spent nuclear fuel, or high-level waste, which comes from reprocessing spent nuclear fuel, or it's low-level waste.
Right.
And that's not a very sophisticated system, and that's what we're dealing with right here. You've got special nuclear material, could be greater than class C. I mean, greater than class C came about because they started looking at their low-level waste classifications, and all of a sudden said, hey, we've got stuff that typically we have to call low-level waste because it's not spent nuclear fuel, it's not high-level waste, it's not transuranic waste, but it's not suitable for shallow disposal. Special nuclear material could fall in that category. So if U-233 was called greater than class C, it would be required to be in a repository. and there are benefits to that. One of the questions that keeps coming up, first of all, I haven't said this yet, and I want to say it more than once. The transportation issue for this material, there is not a risk associated with the transportation of this nuclear material. It's in very, very safe containers. If you weren't looking closely, you might not even notice the trucks on the road with this material in it. But they have millions of miles of accident-free transport of radionuclide materials. They've had accidents, but they've never released radionuclide material. So I don't want to make people think we're worried about the transportation.
No.
And we're probably not really worried about the safety of it being buried at the test site either. This is really more of a question of, is it the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Is it, when we built the facility at the test site, we said it's for low-level waste. And the question on the table here is, even though this meets the waste acceptance criteria, is it really low-level waste? Now, I've called it special nuclear material. I mean, that stuff we're talking about is the stuff that we could make bombs with. And even if it were safe from a perspective of being dissolved and transported out to people from shallow land burial, it's still safer, potentially safer from somebody getting at it if it's buried in a repository. So there's a couple of benefits to looking at this for repository burial as well. So I don't know, I think the reason we did this, it comes from me interacting with one of John's groups, and John asking if we would brief the town board about it so they could be aware of it.
Right.
There's a meeting coming up in August
with the used to be the Community Advisory Board for Nevada Test Site Programs, but everybody
site-specific, Nevada Site-Specific Advisory Board.
Right. These are a group of volunteers like myself in the past that might have some expertise that they need to for environmental management is what they look at for the N2S2 as they call it now. They consist of people from Clark County and some people from Nye County that we are the stakeholders of the Nevada Test Site, or the NNSS as it's called now, and we give comment from the DOE, but we must rely on the information we get from the DOE also, and then we make comment as civilians to be the person, the conduit between DOE and the citizens of for where we live. So hopefully it's less of an abrasive type relationship.
No, it's a good relationship.
I mean, between DOE and the
exactly,
citizens,
right.
And that's what we are there to do. And hopefully we are intelligent enough and capable of understanding what is said and bringing that to the citizens.
This performance assessment calculation where I was talking about the DOE looked at the risk to people out to 500,000 years, that came about as a result of questions from the Site-Specific Advisory Board. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a good interaction. Get that kind of information.
And hopefully they will continue to ask questions of the DOE. And not just
well, this is an opportunity. August 21st is when this meeting is,
and hopefully it'll be at the community center.
It's at the Rudd Center.
Yeah, the community center, and please come there and be part of the community and ask the questions of the board. And there'll be many of scientists and technicians from the N2S2, and I'm sure the NWRPO will be representative.
I'm sure they will.
And Daryl Lacey would be there, hopefully. Here's the thing also with the shipments, we won't know when they're coming through.
No, that's another thing. The DOE looked at this issue, and it has security overtones, and one of the things they wanted to do was to try to make the shipments as safe as they possibly could, so that the DOE has turned responsibility of these shipments over to what's called the Office of Safe Transportation or something like that. It's another facility, another organization that's responsible for shipping special nuclear materials. And so it's going to be done with a little bit more secrecy and protection than it would have been for the regular low-level waste shipments.
This is nothing new. This is nothing new. This has been happening before.
If you want to put that picture back up of the Type B shipping container, we can look at that one more time.
So Ian, you got that one under the truck?
Yeah, there we go. So, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a truck that's inherently very safe.
Yes.
Being escorted under more secretive and more secure conditions.
And that the barbells there may have a cover over them also.
They'll have a cover over it, so it won't be that obvious, right?
but you
Let
should
me-
be able to miss it.
No, let me put a pitch in here for the Pahrump Valley Museum. We have Yucca Mountain exhibits at the Pahrump Valley Museum, and
Yes.
one of the exhibits that we have shows the testing that was done of Sandia, it's quite a while ago now, of those types of shipping containers, to show them being slammed at 88 miles an hour into a concrete wall and not breaking, or
Right.
being immersed in jet fuel and burning and not giving up their
Or having
their
the
contents.
locomotive
Having
hit
a
it so many
locomotive
times
hit it,
over
right.
and over again. I used to play that.
Right. So you can, there's a lot of Yucca Mountain information over at the museum, but that particular one, because they're going to be using Type B shipping containers, if you want to see just how safe those containers are, I'd urge you to go to the museum and look at those transportation films.
I think the only day that they're not open is Monday. So please go to the museum and check out some of the information that we have from Yucca Mountain. We've got a couple of minutes left. If you want to zero in on some of the high points, please do.
Well, I'll try to see what we might have missed.
We won't know when they're coming through. They're completely safe. Our town manager, who recently resigned, we're going to miss you, Bill. But he had mentioned that there's no reason for us to fear, and he brought that point out at the town board meeting.
Right, and that was probably one of the longer discussions at the town board meeting, was people wanting to understand whether or not this transportation would be safe. And I think that all of us, the DOE will tell you, all of us that have looked at this will tell you, the transportation will be safe.
Right.
Now, the fact that it's nuclear, it bothers people, but it's safe. I think that's what you have to remember, it's safe.
Yeah, we could look at the differences between transporting radioactive material and hazardous material too. That is another subject too, but and the amount of radioactive versus hazardous material. But that's another program in itself. We're not saying this is unsafe, but we're saying, is this trip really necessary?
Well, that's the hard part about doing this, is I'm not raising these issues because I don't think it can be done safely. I'm probably raising an issue that really tracks down to the fact that the way we classify waste, nuclear waste in this country, needs to be relooked at.
Right. And we're taking the waste from Oak Ridge, and they were going to do something else with it. They were going
to do some other treatment.
Vitrify it?
It's already vitrified. They were going to do some additional treatments.
Okay, so yeah, so this is they're saving quite a bit of money by giving it to us.
The number I've seen is $600 million.
So this is cost cutting. So plus we're not going to get the 50 cents per ton or whatever it is like we get with the low level waste for.
Well, that's out of my realm. But
so we should ask those questions too.
I think if we were talking about the town board, but I know the county commissioners are interested in this as well, and I know there are meetings scheduled with the DOE and all the parties, the state, the DOE, and the county commissioners. The county commissioners went and met with DOE. I think it was last week. They'll be meeting again with them. I think what the county commissioners would like to see is exactly your point. What can Nye County get out of this for hosting this?
Right, not just free money, but money for the roads, for the emergency services, to just in case something does happen in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love the time we spent together, Dr. Vogel, as always. It's always been so informative, and we thank you for watching.
Thank you for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
And hopefully you've learned something. I do every time I sit down with a good doctor. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ian, and we'll see you next week.